Obviously, the talk of the town over the weekend was Ja Morant. Obviously, there was this big deal made after the game against the Los Angeles Lakers where they had a lead going into halftime, blew it, and got whooped on. And Ja Morant had comments in relation to the coaching staff not necessarily liking his play style and critiquing him in a way that made him feel a little lackluster to come out in the second half and really come out and hoop. Got a lot of criticism, including former NBA All Star Blake Griffin, who questioned his heart and integrity coming out playing the game, looking like somebody that wasn't showing true effort, as well as the overall team, who smacked him with conduct malpractice, essentially suspending him for the game against the Toronto Raptors. And this is a big deal, right? Obviously, every single year, fans, teams are always looking at the storyline, looking for the storyline of who is the next disgruntled superstar that wants out, that could be on the trade block to really shake up the league by going to a different team that could be significantly elevated by that guy being added to their roster. And Ja Morant is somebody that's a really polarizing figure. Of course, part of it has to do with some of the off the court antics over the last couple of years. Some of it has to do with the on the court production or lack thereof over the last couple of years. Obviously, this is a player who's never played 82 games since being drafted. He's someone who hasn't even played 70 games since being drafted. I believe his career high is somewhere around 62. So, this is a guy who has consistently missed 15 or more games a year. He's someone that has a little bit of a checkered history as far as our conversations about him off the court. Although I would say some of it more harmless than others, still stuff that ended up costing him either time on the floor or costed him significant money due to it being something that was against NBA policy. So John Morant has a lot more of a clouded figurehead above him um than he had earlier on in his career, where he was an NBA darling. A lot of people were big on the fact that his athleticism mirrored that of one of my favorite players, if not favorite player in the NBA in NBA history, Derrick Rose, and a guy who, with his play style, his flash ability as like a night to night ESPN top 10 highlight reel guy waiting to happen. He slowly but surely descended from being a guy we were having in the conversation of, top 15 in the game, top 3 or 4 at the position, to like a guy who slowly but surely slid out of favor with NBA media and NBA fans in those kind of conversations. Now, you could say that's partially due to the elevation of guys like Tyrese Halliburton. You could talk about that being the ascension of dudes like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Brunson, obviously. Cade Cunningham has emerged as a real guy at the point guard position, and you pair it with his size. He's a unique build for that position as well, which makes him kind of not an enigma necessarily, but somebody who gains a little bit more interest because of the fact that he's not your traditional point guard size. Luka Doncic fits the bill for this as well, right? So John Morant's kind of fell down the totem pole because of the "what have you done for me lately" proxy, in which Ja just kind of has not really been the dude that he's been in years past. And this season in particular, he's having a really rough year. Yeah, y'all see the graphics. We add new stuff to the pod now. Averaging 20.8 points per game, 3.3 rebounds, 6.7 assists, 40.6% from the field, 15.6% from beyond the arc. Both career lows as far as shooting is concerned. And the question just comes down to, like, is Ja Morant still even like a true star point guard? Maybe we're not even having the conversation about like, is he a franchise guy? Because I think that all is based off where your franchise is at that time, as well as what a point guard means to your franchise elevating. Right? For example, what's a good comparison? Right? Like if the Charlotte Hornets have a deep belief in LaMelo Ball as a lead point guard, you're not going to value Ja Morant as a franchise changer as much as the the Houston Rockets right now looking for a legitimate point guard to fill, for the fact that they do not have a real PG with Fred VanVleet out and trying to substitute that with Amen Thompson having more on-ball role, right? So Like there's a very big difference between whether or not a guy is a franchise guy or not, right? But let's talk about just simply, is Ja Morant still a star guard? Well, there was a conversation on Twitter started by Kevin O'Connor that I thought kind of contextualizes this a little bit more, where he says Grizzlies fans got angry with me for saying Ja Morant isn't a top 40 player. This is the type of stuff I'm talking about. On top of his shaky shooting, declining at rim finishing, inconsistent defense, lack of availability, and poor leadership, it's always the coach's fault, right? Then he has a follow up posting this chart essentially that shows the trend in his decrease in at rim frequency in terms of conversion rate season by season. Starting with his rookie season, he was 49% from at the rim, dropped down to 42 the next season, got up to 43 in 2022. Then in 2023 it was 40. 2024 was 39. Last season it was 33, and this season it's 28%. So of course, as a guy who's not a knockdown three-point shooter, getting to the rim, and as many would say, Ja Morant is a high level rim finisher, or at least he's a guy that is very dangerous around the basket. Stats would suggest that although he may be effective at putting pressure on the rim, he's not as dangerous of a finisher around the rim as he once was when he first entered the league. There's a couple of things that are associated with that. Obviously, the injury history can make that a big deal because a lot of the injuries that Ja Morant has suffered over his career in the NBA have been lower extremity. That obviously hurts things like your explosiveness around the rim, your ability to deal with contact consistently, and things of that nature. So Ja Morant is in a really weird spot right now because his production on the floor has created a certain level of decline that makes it interesting as to what he would look like as a real trade target. And also his leadership aspect makes it where if you are to trade for a guy like Ja Morant, you would want to have a certain level of strong infrastructure within your organization to be able to, quote unquote, tame him when you bring him in. Because with guys like this, at least from the viewpoint of the media, the idea is that you need a strong enough locker room, both from the coaching perspective and the actual players in the locker room who kind of, help keep everything together. You need to have a strong infrastructure in order to be able to keep guys like this at bay. Otherwise, they'll just do it again within a different franchise, right? So, the question then becomes like, what are the names, what are the teams that are really in strong discussion for Ja Morant? Like, what teams should really, really want Ja Morant? Truthfully, I believe there's a ton of teams that should want him, right? Should the Washington Wizards want Ja Morant? It wouldn't hurt. They're building a youth movement right now that I think Ja Morant's timeline does not meet. But would you want a blue chip talent like Ja Morant on his roster as a real distributor that can operate in the pick and roll next to Alex Sarr? Yes. Yes, you would, but that's a little tricky. The Houston Rockets, I think, are an interesting fit in terms of what we're talking about for a ready-made team that has the kind of assets to move off of young pieces, send them to a Memphis team that specializes in uplifting young talent and talent development internally, right? So Houston's an interesting conversation. The Mavericks obviously are a conversation, not only because of the Kyrie Irving stuff, but long term. As a guy that is signed over the next 2 to 3 years, he's somebody that has a lucrative deal that, I mean, if we're being honest, look at the deterioration of somebody like Klay Thompson. If you can have a backcourt of Ja Morant and Kyrie Irving, with Cooper Flag moved to his more natural position at the 3, and you have PJ Washington at the 4 and Derek Lively at the 5, or Derek Lively at the 4 and Daniel Gafford at the 5. Excuse me, I'm not even counting in Anthony Davis, who I probably should. So excuse me, it would be like Derek Lively at the 4 and Anthony Davis at the 5, or vice versa, or Anthony Davis at the 5 with PJ Washington starting. Now you have all of this flexibility, and you know that both of these guys are likely to miss some kind of time. But if it's interchangeable, you always have a quote-unquote all-star caliber guard in the rotation at all times with Ja Morant. So it puts them in a really good spot where they're able to get that point guard that fills out not only the now, but the future as a guy who could grow, not necessarily on the same timeline as someone like Cooper Flag, but somebody who at least fits the early portion of what Cooper Flag's career is. So Dallas could be an interesting fit. I think that another team that would be a really interesting conversation would be, you know, this is a bit of a stretch because I've seen it mocked a few times, but I think it could be interesting. The Minnesota Timberwolves obviously have themselves a real interesting point guard situation, knowing that long term, like Mike Conley's probably done after this year, realistically, right? And Rob Dillingham, you could make the argument that he's just like not ready yet. He's still a very raw prospect as a score first type point guard. And the Memphis Grizzlies are a developing team. The Minnesota Timberwolves are ready to win like right now. They've shown that over the last 2 years, making it to the Western Conference Finals in back-to-back seasons. That's both with Karl Anthony Towns and now without Karl Anthony Towns, right? So this team goes as Anthony Edwards goes, and as far as I'm concerned, that team is good enough to go to the Western Conference Finals, and they were really like one more legit shot maker away from probably being good enough to take down that Oklahoma City Thunder team. And you hear people like Gilbert Arenas, or you hear people like Carmelo Anthony say that like a guy like Anthony Edwards needs a real Robin, a real secondary shot creator, and that Julius Randle's a good perimeter player. Julius Randle's a good second option, but to have a real bring your lunch pail to work, this guy can be someone I can rely on a night-to-night basis to help me out in terms of rim pressure, in terms of scoring, generating offense. Ja Morant could be a really good filler for that, and you likely could acquire Ja Morant without having to move Julius Randle, just likely off the fact that Julius doesn't fit Memphis's timeline, and Julius still has, I believe, 1 if not 2 more years on his contract after getting the extension slash contract the contract given to him this past summer in the re-up. So you could likely have a lineup with the Memphis Grizzlies not taking on Julius Randle. Now Minnesota has Ja, they have Anthony Edwards, and they have Julius Randle. That's an interesting feat. Now, what do the Timberwolves have to give up? That's where things get really interesting. But I think those 3 teams are really interesting fits for different reasons. Now, the most exciting fit, obviously, is Ja Morant next to Anthony Edwards in that backcourt. Is 2 guys that, like, on a night-to-night basis are just going to put up absolutely terrorizing rim pressure. Again, Ja Morant's rim finishing numbers are not great, but as far as putting pressure on the rim on a night-to-night basis, you have to be wary of both Anthony Edwards and Ja Morant, and Ja will have like a knockdown 3-point shooter again at that 2 guard position. You'll have somebody with real defensive upside on the perimeter in Anthony Edwards that's a much better defender on the wing than Desmond Bane ever was next to Ja. And you could probably, this is not 1,000% certain, but if you can do this without giving up Julius, and you can do this without giving up Jaden McDaniels. Like, unfortunately, Minnesota Timberwolves fans will probably hate this because, like, this would likely mean, like, oh, you have to give up someone like Naz Reid, who they love. Minnesota Timberwolves fans swear by Naz Reid. And me personally, I'm not a Minnesota Timberwolves fan, but I was a huge fan of Naz Reid coming out of New York to LSU via NBA, right? Like, this is a guy that since high school, I think has just been a really interesting build of player for your score first power forward. So I know that Minnesota fans probably won't be crazy about moving off of someone like Naz Reid in order to get Ja Morant, but Naz Reid is a little bit more redundant with your Julius Randle type from an archetype standpoint versus Ja Morant fills a legitimate hole at point guard that the Minnesota Timberwolves have, which makes him a really interesting fit. You guys let me know in the comment section down below, which of those 3 teams do you think Ja Morant will be the best fit on if they were to call up with a decent package? Or is there a team that you think I didn't mention would actually be a better fit for Ja Morant if he truly hit the trade block? Because it sounds like at least from what Shams Charania reported on ESPN, it sounds like a lot of teams are putting their ear to the ground and monitoring this Ja Morant situation, because typically when the disgruntled superstar storyline starts, it's a snowball effect that keeps rolling and rolling and typically doesn't make it through the entire season, especially when the type of noise that they have right now is starting so early, both in the season and in the new head coach's tenure. Because I mean, this coach has literally only been around for 6 games, like in terms of real regular season coaching. So, in the NBA, because he has a background in European coaching and one big overseas, but because it's so early in his tenure and it's so earlier in this season, this is something that Memphis is going to want to get a hold of, whether that's trying to get a handle on Ja himself or finding a way to get him out of the mix so that they don't allow their locker room to be tainted and their season to be tainted by a lot of the hoopla around the situation. So again, let me know in the comment section down below, out of Houston, Dallas, and Minnesota, which of those do you believe will be the best fit? Or if you think there's a better fit for Ja Morant on the trade market as a potential team that should reach out for him. I think Phoenix is a wild card as well. They're an interesting fit because Jalen Green, you reflip him, you get a real point guard next to Devin Booker. You get a legitimate score first 2 guard for the Memphis Grizzlies. Could be an interesting fit there as well, right? And he's a soon to be expiring contract because of the type of deal that Jalen Green signed. He's only on a 3-year, which is really just a 2+1. So you only have him this season, one more season, and then you have a team option potentially on him where you can make a decision to not extend him and let him walk, or you can extend him if you think he's doing well, right? So that's another interesting team. So let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about that. Next up,